So we have now a panel of change leaders who are going to present their wisdom and their experiences to us all this afternoon. So I am going to briefly introduce the panel, and then we'll go into some formal questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from the group here. So first I would like to introduce Dr. Alma Clayton-Peterson. She is the CEO of Emeritus Consulting Group, a firm that uses organizational development principles to assist nonprofit, public, and education entities in enhancing their effectiveness for the public good. Previously, Dr. Clayton-Peterson was an AAC&U senior scholar, serving as co-PI and director of the Preparing Critical Faculty for the Future project funded by the National Science Foundation, and served as an AAC&U vice president. We also have Michael Ginsberg, a doctoral candidate from Columbia University. Michael is pursuing a PhD in engineering science at Columbia, where he specializes in solar energy grid integration. He also serves as teaching as research fellow at Columbia's Center for Teaching and Learning. In his work with the U.S. Department of State, Michael has trained nearly 1,000 engineers and technicians in renewable energy and building systems at U.S. embassies worldwide, and worked as an environmental science teacher at the American International School in Niger, West Africa. Last but not least, we have Dr. Mina Pratt-Clark. She's Vice President for Strategic Affairs and Diversity and Professor of Education at Virginia Tech. Dr. Pratt-Clark has almost 25 years of leadership experience in higher education with a focus on large-scale institutional transformation. She recently released A Black Woman's Journey from Cotton Picking to College Professor, Lessons About Race, Gender, and Class in America, published by Peter Lang in 2018, which was awarded the American Education Studies Association Critics' Choice Award for scholarship deemed to be outstanding in its field. So as I said, welcome to the panel this afternoon. So I'd like to start out with, if you could quickly just give us introduce yourselves again. If there's anything else that I've left out that you would like to add, please do, and say a few words about your perspective on Dr. Singer's talk. So, Dr. Pratt-Clark,
sure.
Let's start.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here and thankful for your words. And I had 3 takeaways that I wrote down as she was speaking. The first, I have a phrase that I use a lot when I am trying to think about empowering women and people of color. And the phrase is to assume the power that you don't think you have. And I believe that many of us, especially coming from underrepresented backgrounds, often look at our own selves from a deficit standpoint, as opposed to looking at ourselves from the power that we do have and to be able to use that. So that was one takeaway that I had, is to assume the power we don't think we have, especially thinking about ourselves as leaders and leading from whatever positionality that we have. The second one, I would agree with the point about diversity being in the strategic plan. I had the honor of leading our new strategic plan for Virginia Tech, and this is the first time that diversity is integrated into the plan as opposed to being a separate plan, and it's one of our core priorities out of 4. So the diversity and inclusion commitment is embedded in the strategic plan and helps to shape the direction of the institution. And my final thought related to the comment about the book club and the men, and this question of where are the men. And one of our emerging efforts at Virginia Tech is trying to grow an effort that's called White Men as Full Diversity Partners. And building out of an effort started at Ohio State with an organization that encourages engaging white men to think about themselves as change leaders and recognizing the power and positionality that they have. And we had a group of 4 department heads that went to the boot camp essentially for about 4 days, and it transformed them. Now the challenge is they've been transformed individually, but as department heads, they're trying to figure out how do they now take that knowledge that they have and lead change for their departments.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me to the panel. It's an honor to be here. And so, as mentioned, I'm a research fellow at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia. For the past 2 years, I've been involved in developing a teaching as research program on campus. and I'm currently involved with developing a peer-led teaching as research learning community with another member of the audience, Katie Dixie at UCLA. So it's been a privilege to be involved with that. And a couple of takeaways that I had from your talk was, one thing that really got to me was that I think we need to have or rekindle this activism spirit that we have perhaps buried within ourselves. That's something I remember in undergrad, and always, I was in Washington, D.C., always going and marching and making myself heard. In fact, as my senior thesis, I directly approached the university on the question of toxic chemical warfare cleanup, and remember coming head to head with the department chair of the honors program. The other takeaway for me was that it's something I very much agree with, is leading from the middle. And I think as graduate students, we often are tasked with a dual role of both learning what is social as well as managing up and needing to teach our own advisors, our own research teams about what it is that we do and in teaching as research.
I'd like to add a couple of things to that and to say thank you so much for inviting me and for having such a wonderful experience with many of you and talking with you during the sessions or in between sessions. I'd like to add a little bit about my background. I spent 16 years at Vanderbilt University in 5 different positions, the last one being the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Academic Affairs at Peabody College for Education, which is where I really felt that I had an opportunity to implement many of the things that I had learned throughout my education, working with educators. And I think we have to spend a lot more time focusing at K-12 as well as higher education, because that's where it starts. And if we don't start there, we'll be in trouble for a very long time more. The 3 things that I would like to focus on are talking with faculty. I don't know how many of you know that the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, was one of the partners in the PCFF. The PFF. PCFF was funded later by the National Science Foundation, which we focused on preparing critical faculty for the future. This was the name of the program, and it was really focused on women of color at HBCUs. We think that HBCUs are a panacea, but particularly it's a panacea for the students who go, but not necessarily for the women faculty who work there. That it is predominantly made up of men still, and often international men. And I think that is not a bad thing, but culturally there's a lot of difference there, and we don't pay a whole lot of attention to that, and I think it's really important because of the difference in the way we see the world, the way certain cultures see the world, and how women are treated in that. So the good news that I have out of that was I'm on LinkedIn, and one of the women in the program was posted as having a promotion, and it was to an interim dean position, and she was an assistant professor when she was in the program. So I wrote her back immediately and said, don't settle for that interim position, you go for the dean's position. And she wrote me back and said, thank you. If we don't begin to talk to women, and particularly women of color, and provide the support that they need in order to move in an environment that is hard for women generally, but it's really hard for women of color. Oh, can I get an amen? The second thing was leading together. And what we tried to do was to make that program a cohort so that now they're still together. And Kelly Mack, and I don't know if she's still here, is still running a program that keeps those women coming back to AAC&U to talk with one another. So it's not just about a one-off. All the women were in the program for a year, but continuing to keep them engaged so that they keep moving. So leading together I think is really important. And leading from the middle touches my heart because I have always been in a middle management position. I'm the CEO now, but but in those middle management positions, you do have a means of reaching down to figure out what's going on and what you can do to help, but also reaching up and say, here's what I've heard in the field, and what are we going to do about it at each successive level of movement. And with that, I want to thank you for all three of those.
Great. Thank you for those, those words. So now to get the discussion going, we have a few prepared questions that we have given to the panel to ahead of time. So this is your time to be thinking of your questions and jotting them down. So the first question, I feel like some sort of game show here, goes to Susan. You talked about the need for environmental change to encourage and support diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. What should institutions be doing to support change leaders in this arena? And what will compel institutional administrators to make these changes from your perspective?
So I'm going to start with what would compel institutional leaders to change. And I'm going to offer two things. One is very blatant, and the other's a little bit more nuanced. First, around 2007, at the height of the recession, there was a dramatic decline in the birth rate. And we cannot go back 18 years and change that, right? So 2024, 2025, we're going to see up to a 15% decline in traditional age students going to college. There'll be a slight uptick, and then it just seems to veer off. If you overlay that with the shift in demographics in the country, there's a really terrific analysis done by my colleague Nathan Graw that shows that there will be, either we have to have a 50% adjustment in the negative impact of race and ethnicity, or a 50% adjustment in the impact of socioeconomic status if we're going to maintain our enrollment levels where we are. So we need to have institutions where students will come and stay and be successful. If you would like your institution to stay in business, I think it's actually that blatant. Now, some of the top tier research ones, there's going to be a little bit more flexibility there, but I think that's something to keep in mind. The other piece that's more nuanced is when you bring in faculty from different backgrounds, they bring in different areas of focus with their scholarship. And very recently, there's a troubling analysis of research that's being funded at the NIH suggesting that people of color that come in with research agendas around health disparities and other things are getting funded at a lower rate than more traditional areas of research. Now, as with any study, I'm sure you can tease that apart and there's other threads, but I think that that's a way to underscore that the nature of scholarship, not the quality, not the rigor, but the nature may be changing, and that leads me into things you can do at the institution, right? So you want to think about your tenure and promotion criteria. You want to think about who's making those decisions. You want to think about the leadership of the deans and the provosts and the presidents that are signing off on that and really delving into that. And then I think we also ought to think more about cohort models within the institution. Okay, I've used a lot of bandwidth. I want to hear from my colleagues.
Great, thank you. Question for Alma. You have a unique perspective to share as someone who has worked both within academia and as the CEO of a consulting group that interacts with higher education and other entities. Your work has also focused on improving campus environments to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. From these perspectives, what are the environmental changes that are needed most within higher education to promote diversity, equity, and inclusivity?
My goodness. I've done two things. I've got 3 points that I'd like to make, but I've divided them from the individual, what the individual can do and what the institution needs to do. So you asked it institutionally, so I'm going to try and focus on the institutional, but it's hard because institutions are made up of individuals, and that's every single one of you. So I'm going to try and quickly read my notes so that I can, because I talk really fast if I can. So first, I think we need to increase individual and institutional understanding of A, the actions we need to take to achieve the equity outcomes that learners deserve. that they deserve because they're paying you money to teach them. If there are few or no programs like those we've heard or will hear about over these conferences, commit to starting somewhere to put them in place in your campus. We've heard a lot of different strategies for what to do. Try and put them in place. Institutionally, you'll find that institutional resources are inadequate and you have a school or college of education. Collaborate with faculty there who care about excellence in teaching. I think particularly in large public schools of education, they get berated because those teachers then go to the local public schools and the schools don't do well. They blame the students and the teachers are sort of let off the hook. It's the kids you haven't. You can't teach them. I'd argue differently. When teachers are taught very well, like I had a wonderful opportunity to witness, I think they can make all students do better, do well. Individual actions to develop your skills in cross-cultural understanding and empathy while simultaneously taking that information to assist students in understanding course content that is anchored in their world. So my husband was a high school math teacher for 35 years. He retired 3 years ago, and I'm still out here working. Something's wrong with this picture, right? We invested our personal money on his professional development. The school system had programs for faculty, but we invested, and it made all the difference in the world. I'm going to just give you one caveat of what happened, and that was I was working at Vanderbilt. Of course, there's receptions all the time, and students are invited. This African-American student looked at my name tag and looked at me, and she said, "Are you married to Elton Pedersen, Dr. Pedersen, Mr. Pedersen?" "Yeah, that's my husband." She went off. She said, "When I went into math, I hated it." And he made me understand it from my level, from where I am. And she was there as a math major, if you can imagine that. So I'm saying teachers make a very big difference. You as faculty make a big difference, and you think your students are disinterested, but it's that background that they come to it with that matters. It's all been rote. And so when you can energize them with stories, problem sets to solve that are related to them. He took the recession and what happened and why it happened, and many of those kids were affected by it because their parents had loans and so on, and it got them engaged. So figure out ways to engage them however you can. And I think I'm going to stop there because
you can tell it's a lively topic. Michael, if you didn't know this, you are a doctoral candidate at Columbia and engage in the, it's safer if I read the script. Columbia and engage in their CERTL program. In this role, you have been serving as a change leader by connecting students from across the National CERTL Network in their work on their teaching as research projects. From your perspective, what are the challenges you find the most daunting in considering how to continue to be a change leader in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusivity in higher education?
Well, where do I start? So I have also several points I'd like to make. I've given this question a lot of thought, both as a student and as an educator. I think that the first challenge is learning to be present with our current needs. We need to recognize where we are versus where we want to be, both as an institution and individually. So many institutions really have no precedent for the kind of cross-cutting, interdisciplinary, university-wide efforts proposed by Centers for Teaching and Learning. So we need to first survey these barriers before trying to tear them down, recognizing they might serve a purpose or represent a certain institutional inertia. That's difficult and takes time to overcome. So patience and perseverance are crucial, and the more resources that CTL and graduate students get, the more successful they'll be. Something from this morning really resonated with me and is related to what I prepared as well. Being who we are can be a challenge. In an environment where much of our success is based on others, and in particular our advisors, it's easy to let our insecurities, both founded and unfounded, get in the way of accomplishing our goals. So students often feel judged or uncomfortable being themselves or acknowledging gaps in understanding. And this is especially true in STEM, where imposter syndrome, reinforced by this weed out courses, prevails. As change leaders, we don't need to get into the personal details of our lives, but being honest and confident in ourselves sets a good example for our students, advisors, and peers. I remember making the decision to come out to my study abroad university in Japan as part of a research project on perceptions of homosexuality. My main finding had been that everyone was accepting in principle, but no one actually knew anyone that was gay. So of course I had to change that. I was amazed by the ripple effect that this created, as many later came to confide in me. On the other hand, this is not always possible or safe. I often work in countries where homosexuality is illegal. I remember being asked how my brother, my partner, was for 2 years while living in West Africa. In our academic institutions, we should strive for the former, not necessarily serving as counselors, but by being supportive of individual learning styles and differentiating, instead of comparing students with one another, all of whom come from different backgrounds. We need to leave our preconceptions at the door and be ready to meet our students where they are. So this is something I learned as an educator for adult learners in developing countries. Many of the students, my students, came from abject poverty and never had the chance to finish their high school degrees. But it is precisely these people who have the drive to learn the most and often excel the most in my class. I'm always amazed by resourcefulness and determination of students who have dealt with a lot of adversity. Often, after giving a training in solar energy, I was amazed when I came back 6 months later to learn many of these individuals, who are plumbers or gardeners, have now installed solar on their homes. So these individuals learn voraciously and with purpose, because they know they want the knowledge and they know what a tremendous difference it can make in their lives. And it is our responsibility to help nurture students' self-worth, not to tear it down. I think that best practices are siloed, and that as an institution, we need to, quote unquote, lower the activation energy by sharing knowledge and leveraging existing institutional resources. So, as I said, institutional barriers are very difficult to overcome. We need to pull from departmental knowledge so it can serve as a resource for the entire university, and find out what others are doing well so we can share it with the rest of the university. So this is often time-consuming, and we need to give resources to grad students interested in doing this work by identifying kindred spirits in the departments and facilitating these introductions. We need to educate grad students in IRB and facilitate approvals, preferably through a blanket IRB exemption or having a Center for Teaching and Learning faculty member who can work with new TAR practitioners. I think similarly we need to leverage the CERTL network so peers from diverse institutions can mentor one another, as I mentioned I'm doing with Katie Dixie. We need to equip grad students with the tools to manage up, and we should not be afraid of being critical of current faculty, knowing how to be an activist and disagreeing respectively, how to navigate the landmines, because grad students have a lot at stake. I think that we should hold faculty to just as high a level in their teaching as in their research. And while this is far from perfect, the transparency and accountability of the peer review process could be emulated in teaching. I think that we need to help students find venues within which to implement their own interventions. So sometimes their advisor may not be receptive, or a student does not feel comfortable going to them. At Columbia, we have a new Teaching Assessment Fellows program where students will assess faculty teaching, and it gives them valuable skills that they can market. Finally, another challenge is communicating the benefits of getting involved in CTL or doing a TAR project. In my experience, many grad students understand the effect that teaching, both good and bad, has had on their lives, but they don't know how to carve out the time or value it in the context of research. So because research is what's directly tied to their ability to graduate and get a good job. So I want to leave you all with this question. One question I'm studying now towards communicating the value is, how does planning and implementing a TAR project impact one's doctoral research? I know that in a study done by UW-Madison, doing a TAR project was shown not to lengthen time to completion. But I hypothesize that it can actually modify the content of your dissertation, promote interdisciplinary methodologies, and early on enough, learning about TAR can give you a structured way of thinking about your own dissertation research. So thank you for your time. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be involved, and if you have any interest in collaborating on this type of a study, let's chat.
Great. Okay. I'm going to work for him when he's a president of a university someday. So, Mena, having served in a variety of administrative roles in higher education and having had a focus on your career in institutional transformation, how can current and future faculty best work with administrators to compel change towards prompting diversity, equity, inclusivity from your perspective?
Thank you. I think the focus on the word compel is interesting as well. It's hard to compel things in the academy. I start from thinking about the work that I did on the book that I published last year, which was my mother's journey to becoming a full professor, growing up in the 1930s and picking cotton as a sharecropper. And in her journey, she talks about just the systematic barriers that exist for women and people of color in the academy. So that was 50, 60 years ago. But just about 5 years ago in our country, in almost every institution across the country, in large, small, public, private institutions, black students were protesting almost the exact same things that she was protesting. And so it made me ask and wonder, is it that over a 50 or 60 year period in our country, had we not made progress on those issues, such that we were still having those conversations, or had some progress been made? And I concluded that yes, progress had been made, but when I took time to look at specific institutions, what I realized is that the change at institutions was often the result of one good person who was there for many years doing the good work, and when that person left, moved on, the work shifted. And I remember hearing many conversations like, oh, remember when so-and-so was here? Oh yeah, they had that great program for minority students. Oh, what happened? Oh, so-and-so left. Oh yeah, we had that great advanced grant, and so-and-so was leading, and then what happened? Oh yeah, so-and-so left, got promoted. So these changes have never been in the academy, and it's not just that I focused on institutional transformation. For me, it's sustainable institutional transformation. And so what I have tried to lead at the last two institutions, I'm at Virginia Tech now, I was at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and then at Vanderbilt, where Alma was, so I know her for a long time, is to think about what does sustainable institutional transformation look like. When I started at Virginia Tech, I started in an office of inclusion and diversity that had two people, a secretary and an associate director. The team now is almost 20. Over a 4-year period. And resources have been invested, and we have defined not diversity as an initiative, but as an institutional commitment. So inclusive VT is what we call our diversity commitment, and it's the institutional and individual commitment to our motto. And our motto at Virginia Tech is ut prosum. It means that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence. And so 4 years ago, we defined our diversity commitment, and then we identified 4 goals. The first goal is sustainable institutional transformation. The second one is representational diversity. The third is campus climate. And the fourth is academic mission. And it's about how we integrate diversity and inclusion into all 4 of those goals. At the same time we did that work at the institutional level, we asked every college and department to create their own diversity plan that address those 4 levels. So when I think about this question in terms of how can an institution, or at least at our institution, engage faculty, staff, and students, it's having a structure that enables faculty, staff, and students to plug into the structure, but it's owned by the work of the institution. The structure of inclusive ET and the academic mission has compelled perhaps the institution to think about teaching excellence and inclusive excellence. So right now we have an HHMI grant that we have been looking at. There are over 57 faculty. We've tried to include graduate students as well as younger faculty as well as tenured faculty in redesigning their curriculum and courses for key science classes. So it's over a 5-year period. We're building more departments and faculty to be part of the program, and we just had this conversation the other day about how we're going to make sure it's institutionalized after the grant runs out. And we're starting to think about moving it from just the life sciences or the science side of our campus to include engineering. So I think when there's a structure and there's a focus on sustainable institutional transformation, these structures can become embedded as culture. Because ultimately, it's culture, it's shifting the culture where diversity and inclusion becomes part of how an institution thinks and breathes and does its business, that you ultimately have institutional transformation.
Great, thank you. Well, you've heard from our panel. Now it's your opportunity to ask your questions of these change leaders. So we have microphones running around. Again, if you raise your hand. Okay, too much chicken, too much pork, too much turkey. And here we go. Someone over. Did I see a hand over?
There's 3 over here, 4.
Oh, okay. Center table over here, Kit, I think, or someone. Oh, Ann, are you going?
I'm Ann Austin. I'm at Michigan State University. I appreciated very much the comments of the speaker and the panelists and Michael's comments specifically about some of the things to think about with our graduate students. I wanted to invite the panelists to take that a little further and maybe speak directly, say, to the CERTL network as to particular ways that we might think within the CERTL network of preparing future faculty as change leaders, taking into account what I thought were very thoughtful comments about the challenges, the complexities, the nuances of change. And I appreciated Michael's comments. What might be particular ways that the CERTL network might take forward the agenda of this panel?
Thanks for asking that. I have a couple of thoughts, and I think one of the ways in which the CERTL-wide network can be leveraged is by providing opportunities to graduate students across the network. So this is basically an idea for like sort of a job board, or in a way for a professor to reach out and look for students who are interested in doing interventions in their classrooms. I personally did not have an opportunity to implement my entire project because of a lack of a venue. So I think that's one specific way.
Sure.
I've had a thought too, but Alma, do you want to go first? I've got,
you
I
got
guess
your
I'm
mic.
wired up, yeah. So I've heard a lot of conversation in the last day and a half about being an untenured faculty member and a whole range of perceptions on, waiting to lead, what should you do, what shouldn't you do. And I would love to see professional development within CERTL about change leadership over the arc of your career, where there was a curriculum put together with examples and guidance so that you continue to grow as a leader, but there are appropriate ways to lead at each stage. And I totally agree that a pre-tenure faculty member walking into a new institution that may not be a CERTL institution and may not have the perspective we'd like yet, one needs to be careful about, you don't walk up to someone and say, so I hear you're still lecturing in a traditional way, right? It's just not going to work. But there are lots of things. There's co-mentoring where you can take advantage, and often it's best a colleague outside of your department, whether it's a formal program or an informal program, that you become co-mentors, and that individual is helping you learn how to navigate the culture of your new institution, and you're inviting that colleague into your classroom. And I actually ran a program like this a number of years ago at another institution. And what's amazing is mid and late career faculty suddenly transform because they were interested to try something, but they didn't know how to do it. And you, as the young career member, are mentoring them, and you both get something. That's one example, but I really do think if we could look at it over the arc of the career, and again, please make it explicit rather than implicit, we could empower a lot of folks so they don't get discouraged and then they have to wait 6 years.
Alma?
I think that, the title of this one is really about how to increase the individual institutional understanding of the actions we need to take. So one of the things that I wrote that didn't talk about earlier was that faculty chairs and other faculty mentors need to be engaged in a conversation around inclusive pedagogy to assess the possibilities of what can be done to determine where students are when they come into the learning process. What we typically do is to bring students into the classroom, and we've got a set syllabus and we keep moving on, keep moving on. And we don't change what we do based on what they know. So I don't know if I'm answering the question here, but I thought this one was relevant. We have to, in order to allow faculty to do this, is to think about how do we include that as part of the tenure process. I've heard faculty say, I want to do this, but they're making me teach 6 courses a year and no break, and they give me the worst students because of where I am. I'm not going to say any more about the person who said this to me, but it was very powerful to me that institutions do this to new faculty. And not even faculty, I mean full-time faculty. And I see people nodding their heads. That's sinful. Because you not only are discouraging the faculty member, you're discouraging the students. And we're all wringing our hands about retention and who we're going to graduate. Well, you're pushing them away. And if you actually help faculty learn how to teach better, they would stay because they get engaged and they want to stay. They want that dream just like you did. You're here, but they aren't. Look around the room. Look around the room. Enough said.
I'll be quick. That's like a lot of great advice. I often think of the academy as a place with unknown rules.
Amen.
And so to the extent that CERTL and other organizations can help make the rules explicit, there's a flyer on the table for a conference that I've been hosting now for 8 years. It's the Faculty Women of Color in the Academy Conference. It's about making the rules explicit, that there are rules of the game, and we need to know what the rules are. We can choose whether we want to play by them or not, but we have to know them. And I find that many times, future faculty, even broadly out of the context of individuals who are disproportionately impacted by their identities, graduate students don't know the rule of the game. And they become faculty and they still don't quite know the rules. And so I think to the extent, I feel we have a responsibility in the academy to make sure we all know what the rules are. And then we can get to the point of challenging and interrogating them. So if the rules for tenure are XYZ, one department had a requirement of 28 publications. That's just an odd number, But if that's the rule, then we maybe can interrogate that. But a lot of times we can't begin to interrogate and dismantle a system we don't understand. And so I think to the extent that we want to shift the academy in some ways, everybody has to know the code. And what I say a lot of times, given my position, I think people assume because I'm a vice president, I'm in the room. And I say, yes, I am now in the room. And I've been at different stages of my career when I wasn't in the room. Okay, so now I say, I'm in the room, and yes, the whole Hamilton thing, be in the room, okay, I am in the room. Okay, I'm in the room, and I'm at the table, right? So lean in. The book said make sure you sit at the table. If you're a woman or person of color, don't sit in the back of the room. Okay, so I sit at the table. But I say there's a third stage that most people don't talk about, and that's understanding the code at the table. And I say I'm still learning. So there are meetings where I'm like, I know one day I'll understand what they're talking about. And I know there was probably a pre-meeting that I wasn't at, and a pre-meeting, and then they came in and they decided, and then they had a post-meeting that I might not have been part of those conversations. So I think to the extent that we're going to change the academy and help future faculty be prepared, we have to find spaces in which we can share the code.
Great, thank you. Well, I might add that you talked about the imposter syndrome, and we have found at our university the junior faculty suffer from the same imposter syndrome, which relates not knowing the code. How do you behave? How do you act? And so forth. So that continuation of the arc, I think, is important. Dr. Lee, I think you had is there questions over here? I don't know where the mic went. Oh, I'll get you next over here. Next.
support the in-betweeners. So like postdocs, visiting assistant professors, adjunct faculty, fixed-term faculty, all these people are kind of ephemerally coming through academia and maybe popping in and out. How can we better have a more robust teaching professional development system in place that can accommodate those folks?
Great. If you may say your name and your institution so we can start learning who is amongst us here as well.
Oh, sure. Sorry. My name's Nate Emery. I'm a postdoc at Michigan State.
Who would like to take that on first?
I actually didn't hear what he said.
He was talking about how you deal with the in-betweeners, the postdocs, the visiting faculty, the professional track faculty. Did I interpret it right?
Yeah, faculty, those who don't have any tenure.
You know, I'll share a couple things that we've done because I feel very, very strongly about that, possibly as a parent of one of those in-betweeners. But let's start with adjuncts, right? Think about what happens to most adjuncts. Adriana Kazar has a new book that's coming out on the gig economy in higher ed. So we have developed, our adjuncts are welcome to all of our professional development happenings, but often there are folks that are working elsewhere or of other commitments. So we have worked really hard to create high quality online materials for them, and I have a wonderful colleague who sends out care packages every week, which include very short videos with just-in-time need to know, students are registering now, or, this is the ad drop date, or this is how you could gather midterm feedback. Those are probably more trivial examples. His are fairly sophisticated, so that they feel totally a part of the community. We have weekend adjunct short retreats. The attendance has gone up, and really trying to share the message that you are part of our community. We have a school for adults that runs on a lot of adjuncts. And then for visitors, right? Our new faculty orientation, they're like week-long, in-depth workshops and all. We welcome our visitors. We work with our departments. These folks all are teaching our students, and just as we know sense of belonging is super important for our students, guess what? It's equally important for all of us. And all of you are in a department, go back and think hard about, do you invite visitors? Do you invite lecturers to your department meetings? How are people feeling about being part of that? And are there some ways you could shift practices? Because your students would benefit as well as the tweeners.
Can you say a little bit more about the role of the institution? You're in a position of power. No, and it matters. And you can say when somebody brings you a new idea, we're going to do this because this sounds good and it's consistent with my sense of values. How do you help those who have presidents and provosts who don't believe? I'm sorry, because to me that's the crux of the problem.
Well,
you're going to teach
all
them?
of you could, consider as your career goes on, right? I didn't want to walk away from my research lab, but I really believed in change, and so I think we all need to step up to the plate, and they're actually pretty interesting jobs. So think about how you can be part of the solution. Another really important role I've built into my institution now, and we're going through the next round of this, and I am convinced it's a bang-up success. I'll tell you why in a moment. The associate dean positions are all 3-year rotating positions with the possibility of a single 1-year renewal. Okay, I'm trying to build leadership within the faculty. This is a way for faculty to have a voice, to learn, and to be heard. If you have those rotating opportunities at your institution, that's something you can do without giving up your long-term research career. Really important. And if you have an opportunity to serve on a search committee for your provost, for your president, don't say I'm too busy. I mean, if you have a brand new baby at home or triplets at home, you should say I'm too busy. But if you don't have something like that going on in your life, be part of it. And in every institution, right, there is shared governance. Be part of that shared governance. Suggest that it would be really great if usually they're 2 to 3 times a year or more, the trustees meet. Ask if there can be a meeting between faculty leaders and the trustees. The trustees love knowing what's happening. And then think about how you handle that role in a very responsible, professional manner. They won't listen to you if you go in and whine and complain. But if you can be very professional, you can get a lot of messages across. And guess what? The president reports to the trustees, right? The trustees evaluate the success of that president. And I know in state systems and private systems, it's all a little different. But everybody has a boss. There are a lot of ways you can influence the system. I work really hard to keep faculty happy, to consult with faculty, to be really transparent. You have way more power than you might realize.
Anna,
Yeah.
quickly.
I just wanted to thank you for that question. I think in our institutions, we have individuals that are just in the underbelly, and they don't have a defined status, but they play critical roles, and oftentimes they're overlooked. One of the opportunities that I think doesn't happen enough, and there's just certain points in time where those underbelly, that's probably not the best word, but maybe the reality, positions become powerful, and that's when they decide to strike. Okay, so if they form a union, they decide to strike, it's like, oh my God, all these people who are teaching our classes aren't going to teach them. Now, I don't think we need to always go to that radical a level, but the coming together of that group on a campus to say, what are our unique needs? What do we need? What do we want? What will help us to teach better, to be more productive? I mean, you also have research scientists and other sort of research positions that are also a little bit out of the norm. And so I think to the extent they can come together and identify, and there might be differential needs across those positions, but there might be some points of uniformity. And to put that request out there to the department, to the institution, it might create a shift in terms of some key needs that they have. Maybe it's just professional development. Some could be fairly simple, some might be more complex. Like we need to be part of department meetings because we never know what's happening. So I think where I've seen those groups, and it still goes back to my very first point, which was assume the power you don't think you have. So many times I think in those positions you feel disempowered and powerless. But I actually think sometimes coming together as creates a stronger group and a stronger voice that then can help shift change.
All right, thank you. We had a table, Dr. Lee, was that, or who has the who has the microphone now?
This is a 4-hour question.
So, Alma, my question first is for you. When I heard you encourage that female faculty member to accept the dean role in a permanent position, but she was also pre-tenure, what I didn't hear was that was going to be counted towards her application towards tenure, or she was already ahead of schedule. My question was, it sounded like an honor, but it also sounded like a burden that would get in the way of her progress.
No, I didn't. That was you who said that.
No, it was your student, the woman you advised.
Oh, yes, that was an interim position. I'm sorry.
I'm dealing with whether someone is ready for full professor before I bring them so we don't set them back. But yeah, I want to hear.
At the time when she, oh, I'm sorry. At the time she was in the program, she was an assistant professor, but working toward. And she's been out long enough for her to have been tenured. But I don't know, because I'm not in that program anymore, but I could find out. I can find out. And you're right, it could be, if it's done before tenure, it's really makes it harder, because the role of the associate dean and dean is tremendously time consuming. And you could be really, really good at helping students understand why they're there and to persist and all of that. But if it takes away from you getting tenure, it's problematic. So one of the points I was going to make earlier had to do with what we do with people on the tenure track. First of all, making it clear what does it mean to how to get there. But the second thing is, what support does that person get to make it there? Do you get a buyout at some point? Do I have to get 2 grants in order to get a buyout? Is there a space where we can sort of let go of those old rules and say, well, this is a really good professor. How can I keep him or her?
My follow-up question is to Minna. Is it, how do you pronounce your name?
That's Minna.
Okay. You made a comment about the unwritten rules. I'm going to push a bit on that as well and say that there are also rules that haven't been written yet. There was a Spelman student who went to Virginia Tech of sorts in grad school, but her issue wasn't what sounds like usually is a diversity and inclusion issue, is how can we support students who need extra. She actually was a high performer. She went there and they didn't believe that she performed so well, so they made her retake a test because they thought she did too well, that she must have been cheating. They made everyone in the class take the test, and she still did better than them. So my question is, even when it's an achievement status that is not a deficit model, how do you orchestrate the rules to allow for achievement to come from a place that someone might not expect?
So I don't know if that's about rules that are written or unwritten, or it's about the way bias and implicit or explicit bias. So I feel like we became comfortable as a country because we struggle to talk about the actual thing. We talk about the related thing. So it's like now everyone needs to do unconscious bias or implicit bias training. And I believe in that, but there's also discrimination. And there's explicit stereotyping and racism and sexism. And so navigating that explicit nature as well as the implicit nature, to me, it's not necessarily that they're unspoken rules. It's just a violation of, it's just racism. And because as a culture, we never have conversations, starting with the K-12 point that Alma made, about race or about gender or gender identity. We don't talk about identities as a country. And then we get in these complicated spaces where we need to be talking about the issue. And so we can't expect, in a country that's never fully interrogated the issue of race in America, to, have a higher ed environment that does that. And so when we're trying to, but I do think we have to try to get there, okay? And I think higher ed institutions, if we're going to take the lead in some way, we have to figure out ways of starting to talk about difficult conversations. I think that there have been some areas that have forced the conversation, so around LGBTQ issues. They've bubbled up now, people are getting a little bit more conscious and sensitive, but I think people also still, I just personally believe we get comfortable with the soft end of a thing instead of the hard end. So we're comfortable talking maybe about gender pronouns, but not really fully appreciating what it means to be an ally to the LGBTQ community. Just because you offer your pronouns doesn't mean you understand the full complexity of issues that are involved. So I think that, we have to get to the point where we can call a thing the thing. And then, I have nuanced this issue over the years, and so I don't think you can walk into a room and say, hey, let's talk about diversity. People of color, people who are not of color, majority, it's like nobody wants to talk about it. You can't do that. But if you say, let's talk about community, let's talk about our friends and friendship, you can get to the harder issue. And I do think you have to get there, but I don't think you can lead with that.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Janet?
Thank you very much for this panel. Janet Rutledge from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC. Getting back to the earlier discussion about what assistant professors can do, it occurred to me that we have a formal sanctioned way for assistant professors to be involved, and that's the NSF career program. Because there's the research part and the teaching part. And very often, the educational component is a little bit weak because people just aren't exposed to the kinds of things that they can do. And so this is a take-home for myself, and maybe lots of others are doing it, but it didn't occur to me that our CERTL should be holding workshops for our all new assistant professors in NSF disciplines to say, here's how you put together a really strong career proposal, and when you have the backing of NSF that says, I have funding to do this, and my department chair had to say, yes, I support this, that's a way to make sanctioned change in a way that is safe for assistant professors.
Great. All right, well, thank you. And I would like to thank our panel, Mena, Alma, Michael, Susan. for a very enlightening conversation.